Hi, Katie. How are you today? It's been a couple weeks since we were able to connect last. How are you?
I'm doing well, and it's good to see you. I almost said good morning, and then I remembered it's only morning for me.
It
It's
is.
evening. Good evening.
Thank you. And actually, we're heading into dinner soon. So this is a great way to end my work day and hanging out with you. So let's not waste any more time and let's connect with our listeners. We are on episode 8 for strengths, and Katie and I have been having these conversations for the last several months and just having a little bit too much fun. And we don't get paid for this, but it's really fun. So we must love what we're doing, huh?
We must. We must. We're using our strength, right?
We're using our strengths, you bet. Well, today's topic is how do strengths impact learning? If you watched episode 7, you discovered that we were talking about how strengths impact our leading in our various industries and positions that we're in. And today we're going to talk about how do strengths impact learning. Katie, you and I talked about leaders always need to keep learning. And so this is going to be a fun engagement, I think, based on our strengths and what that looks like. So, any thoughts you have about how strengths do impact learning to start us off? And then we can both dive into each of our strengths and how they do specifically show up.
Yeah, I think, well, we had a fun little pre-conversation where we were just kind of starting to dive in and explore it a little bit. And we share some of the same strengths, but already we can begin to see how they show up differently. So
Hmm.
it's kind of fun for me that we're having this conversation because I've gone back to school. And so it's fresh in a different way, like
Oh,
always as a leader learning, but then also real specifically working towards my master's in counseling, like getting to see like, oh yeah, here's that strength at play or this strength at play. So whether it's Gallup and the Clifton Strengths training that they do for coaches or more traditional educational process, our strengths, I think, are always at work.
yes, for
Yeah.
sure. And yeah, I can't wait to hear more about how the learning has been impacted by your strengths as well, especially with
Yeah.
you back in school. So thanks for sharing that. So let's do this. When we think about leaders keep learning, it is true that so many times when we're learning, it's hard to learn. It can be boring. Sorry, all you professors out there. Sometimes content can be boring, but it's needed, right? So it's been really fun to think about how do our strengths impact our learning. So, you know what I did? I took my 5 strengths and just
Uh-huh.
kind of put a sentence next to each of them in terms of how they impact my learning. So I'm excited to hear how the ones that we have in common will
Yes.
be different because of our personalities. So the first one for me is connectedness. And so if I'm going to learn about a subject or if I'm going to learn about a particular topic, I really need to connect with that topic. My first strength is connectedness. And so I really need to connect with it or I tune out. Um, that's on one end, I tune out, but the other end is that I have to work harder if it's a topic that I really do need to learn about, right? So
Oh,
it's just,
sure.
it kind of pulls me in opposite directions. So that would be my connectedness, really needing to, connect with the topic more so. The next one for me is responsibility. So when I learn something, especially if it's something that I'm passionate about, or if I just randomly learn a new idea, new thought, new perspective, I get really antsy because I want to implement it. Because if I don't implement it, that could be my activator. If I don't implement it, then it feels useless. Right. So we
Yes.
were just
Yeah.
yesterday, I was sitting with some friends in a conversation, and one of the girls was sharing something that I had not really learned about before, but my connectedness took over. It connected her idea to something else in my brain. And I was like writing this video, this like the notes to a video in my head of how I would, start to teach that. So I'm going to guess that that's my activator, which is my third strength. And again, if I'm learning something that I really resonate with and I connect with, I have to share it. So right away, I want to write a post or I want to write a blog or just write up an article and, it doesn't really go anywhere, but I do that. Or I want to start a dialogue about it, right? Because an experiential learner. And I think that's actually, honestly, it just came to me looking back. I think that's why I wrote the 2 books I wrote because I was learning so much and then I was able to put them out. for other folks to kind of learn about those things as well. And my last two, one second to last is belief. In our last episode, we talked about how leaders need to keep learning. And so that is actually a really core value for me. And it's important that if I'm learning as a leader, I need to pour that out. I need to make sure that I'm mentoring people. Obviously, I'm doing it with my coaching when I'm with my clients, but it becomes part of my core value of learning and wanting to grow forward. Even though my bent is more experiential, like I said, I really need to learn how to be open to other methods of, engagement and, gaining knowledge and wisdom and that kind of thing. And last but not least is woo. We all love woo, don't we? I actually use woo to learn about other people. I love asking questions. For folks who know me well, I love to just ask questions. And, I also teach on the 5 levels of communication. So when I'm engaging in a conversation with someone, I work through step by step to get them into a deeper place. And so for me, questions are like a shovel, and they either can help you dig shallow or dig deeper to get to know someone. So that's how I learn people with my woo. How about you? Go ahead.
I love that. Well, before I jump into me, I'm
Yeah.
trying to remember because I think that you have input in your 6 to 10. And
Number 6.
so, yes, so when you were talking about your need to write a book and sort of share your wisdom, I think that's your input, sort of getting in on the game and that, not keeping it to yourself. It's learning, but it's learning sort of for the sake of others too, in a way. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't discover that I had input till about having my top 5 opened. I have had them for about 12 years before I actually had my
Oh,
full 34 opened.
uh,
And then when I saw that input was number 6, it was kind of like, oh my goodness, this makes total sense.
it
Collect it, put it
does.
in one place. you know,
The full 34 really does give you the whole picture, right? You
it
start
does.
to see like, oh, that begins to make sense. Why
Yeah.
that, versus if you're just in your top 5 trying to figure out like where is some of this coming from? Well, lots of times it's coming from that 6 to 10, 6 to 12
Hmm.
section of your report. Those
Yeah.
strengths are at play. So,
Hmm. That's really
um,
helpful.
my number one is positivity. And I was trying to think about like, how does positivity play into my learning? I think ultimately it's just that optimistic sort of like, if you think traditionally in school, when you get those syllabus at the beginning of the semester and it feels a bit overwhelming, at least it does to me.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
Normally, we don't see 14 weeks. In the business world, you don't necessarily go, I know I have to do all of these things over the next 14 weeks. We get surprised every day.
Yeah.
Like we have a
Sure.
general plan and then stuff happens that you're responding
Hmm.
to. But so school is a little bit more set. So I think for positivity, just that idea of like, okay, I can handle this. I can see how
Nice.
this in the end will all work out.
Hmm.
Uh, and then connectedness is my number 2. And it shows up a little bit differently than yours, which is the beauty of strengths and what I
I love
love
it.
about it is for me, connectedness is that sort of big picture, but how does it all fit into the
Oh,
picture? So
right.
as I'm assimilating the information, where does it connect? How is it part of the bigger picture that's around, or
Hmm.
where does it fit in? So it can be sort of strategic for me, but
Hmm.
also it definitely has that big picture aspect. Um, but where do the pieces kind of fit in, and how am I going to use those pieces going forward? So,
Hmm.
interestingly enough, like I think we talked about it earlier in one of our earlier sessions, I had broken my shoulder
Oh, yeah.
earlier this winter, and I was having such a hard time taking all of the information I was learning and
Mm.
connecting it. And so it was just fascinating to me how the healing of my shoulder really was influencing how our bodies are all connected,
Oh, so
and
true.
that my brain was, because it was busy healing and that was sort of invisible and I couldn't necessarily see what was going on
Hmm.
in the system, it was still affecting like how I was processing information. And it was about 2.5 months after, it was like things kind of clicked. It was very
Wow.
fascinating to
It
me.
is.
So
Yeah.
that's just kind of an aside, but an interesting thing to notice. It was very frustrating and hard when you do have, and probably because connectedness is so high, I'm
Yeah.
used to thinking that way, and sort of having that system of thinking interrupted a little bit. So
Wow, that's really
um,
great. I'm refraining from using my connectedness and activator in this conversation right now. So keep going. This is
I
great.
know. I'll try to be faster so then
No,
we
you're
can get
fine.
to the interact. Um, and then responsibilities, my number three, and
Hmm.
how that one that shows up a little bit different for me also. That one is really what helps me like meet the deadlines, keep on time. It is I lean heavily on that executing strength. And just if I've said I'm going to do something, doing
Hmm.
it. So that's
That's
where
true.
responsibility really shows up for me. And also on the shadow side, very hard for me to adjust and sort of give myself grace
Sure.
sometimes if
Sure.
things are happening, and just really feeling driven by those deadlines and doing what I said I would do. So,
Hmm.
and then woo is number four. And that is actually very similar to what you said. I
Yeah.
love meeting other people, hearing their stories. Um, seeing places where we can connect, like what do we have in common, how can I make someone feel comfortable, so in coaching that's great, but
Oh,
even in the
absolutely.
process of if I'm at a conference or I'm in a
Hmm.
classroom and connecting with new people, so just that whole aspect of winning others over, which is woo,
Hmm.
in case you're new to strengths.
Yes. I know we take
And
that for granted, right? It's like second language for both of us, and
yeah.
you need to
And
explain that
then
every now
my number
and
five is input. And so
then.
that again for me is I do love to learn. I have learner in my 6 to 10. Um, and but input is that sort of gathering information, but it is for the sake of sharing with others. It's not just for my own benefit. So I think always collecting kind of in
Yeah.
my mind, and then that connectedness of how do I share what I've learned? How do I um, and even the desire to learn, like just learning for the sake of maybe collaborating in the bigger team. Um, and so it shows up
Yeah.
in my desire to learn. And in fact, I am teased often by lots of people because
It's all good.
I'm like in some class certification. I'm always doing some sort of learning. So I think that's
Yeah.
just what we're talking about is kind of that
Hmm.
spirit of curiosity. Like, how are we curious
Hmm.
about our world and what we do within the
Hmm.
world, and that spirit of continuous learning? Like, how do I take my strengths and apply those in my own unique way to
Yeah.
learning?
That's
Um,
great.
yeah.
I think that's really valuable. And there was one point that you were talking about that just really struck a chord when you were talking about connectedness, and you broke your shoulder. And I'm so glad you're healed now and back to somewhat regular normalcy, right?
Yeah. Yes.
No, but you were talking about how just the pain and the fact that it was broken, that you couldn't connect the learning, you couldn't like
Yeah.
unbreak the
Yeah.
learning, so to speak, right? And so I can relate to that when I think of my own journey, but then others as well that I've worked with. If there's anything going on like depression, or there's some burnout, or there's any kind of, we'll call it just brokenness in someone's
Yeah.
story, it's harder for them to learn. It's harder for them to grow forward, right? And I remember from my own story, some things that I had experienced, and there was some trauma in my story. It was hard for me to just push myself forward, just learn the new way, just do it, right? And thank you, Nike, for just do it. But it didn't work. It was so hard. It was so frustrating. But I think it's
Mm.
to your point to say the pieces weren't together physically. And so in my case, probably I'd say mentally because the trauma had affected me.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and then until that healing took place, then I was able to move forward with the learning. And then it was just this snowball effect. The more I healed physically and mentally and emotionally, the more I was learning, and I was putting those learnings into practice, which then met the healing again, right? So it became a
Yeah.
little cyclical. So I think just that going from brokenness to wholeness. Uh-oh, I think we're coming up with a new topic. You
Yeah.
know, so
Yeah, really. Right?
so we'll just leave it there. But that really struck me as you were sharing that. I really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, like I think what you're talking about too is that we can have this sort of, I kind of described it the other day to someone as like this hum that's going
Hmm.
on
Yeah.
underneath the surface. Everything's kind of got to push through that. So
Hmm.
if we're anxious, if we're depressed,
Yeah.
um, if we have a lot going on just in
Yeah.
our either our work life, our home life, like those things, those are all things that are having influence over how we show up and what we can do. So we can use our strengths to help us,
Hmm.
live through and with those things, but to have grace, I think, for ourselves and sort of
Yeah.
say, okay, I need to acknowledge like all is not well. Like it's
I
okay.
know well.
And that is really hard. I mean, it's hard to
Yeah.
say, I think my tendency was like, I'm gonna just pretend everything's fine. So what? I
Mm-hmm.
did this. I still need to perform at this level. And
Mm-hmm.
it just really wasn't possible. Like
Right.
exactly what you were saying. It's like, well, I can try to just do it, but
Yeah.
that doesn't always work. So how did I, and some of it was a timing thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing the things I need to do, but also having the space and the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is sort of for me anyway, with that healing, the healing hit a certain point and things were better. Now everything's not 100%. That's interesting too, right? Like, so they're
Yeah.
kind of, how do we set our goals and how do we, whether it's in learning and are those reasonable and all of those kind of things. That would be a whole
Yeah.
nother
Here would be a whole nother topic. I made notes. And I think so to use that old phrase, the new normal. And I think
Yeah,
that's a whole nother level of learning, right? So I was talking
yeah.
to someone the other day and she said, learning is like this. It's an upward spiral. And I looked at her, I said, okay, if that's your perspective, but for me, it's a downward spiral. It doesn't mean it's
Oh,
negative. It just
yeah.
means I'm going deeper and deeper into my narrative, which actually touches on another topic that you and I talked about before, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
So this is
Yeah.
great. Good stuff on learning. Any closing comments you want to have on this topic before we sign off?
Yeah, I just think for those of you who maybe have input or learner in the bottom of your full 34, don't despair. Like you can still, I would say, we all have a certain amount of learning that we have to do within our regular everyday life. And so the awesome part about strengths is how do I take what my top 10 are and apply those to the things that I need to do? So no matter what your top 10 strengths are,
Mhm.
you can apply those toward any learning that you need to do.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I do believe I have input and learner in my top 10. So there's hope. That's
Yes.
awesome.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. This was way too much fun. As usual, I look forward to our next conversation coming up soon. And hopefully, our listeners are also enjoying this topic. So, thank you so much. For those who want to know more about Gallup Strengths, you can go to the website. You can reach out to Katie or myself. You can, continue to learn and grow and find new ways to learn and to develop yourself professionally and personally. And so we will see you again next time. All right. Bye,
Great.
Katie.
Thank you. Bye.